Good evening. Let's pray as we begin tonight. Dear Father, we come before you as a family, as a body of your people, and we just have a simple request. We want to place you on the highest place in our lives, in our homes, in our places of work, in our schools, in our church. We want you to be in our highest place. So please help us as we study tonight and as we go throughout this week to live like that. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Luke 14. We'll continue our study from this morning. Luke chapter 14. I got a text from Donna Bryan this afternoon. We talked about pride this morning. Donna texted me. She said that my sermon this morning reminded her of a phrase that her dad told her all the time. It cracked me up, so I wanted to share it. It's a phrase that said, "You're too proud to be so poor." That's tough. That's tough. But I love this idea of pride. Not having it, but I love thinking about it because it's important for our lives. When you have something like this hub, I was looking for something to help illustrate this afternoon, so this is the best I could come up with. This is a hub for my laptop. This little cord plugs into the laptop, and these outlets here can connect to different things. So if you're trying to take something like this that's bent one direction, and you're trying to make it straight, what happens if you do that? See what happened? Where it's bent to this one side. So then I pull it up to make it straight, and it gets a little better, but it comes right back this direction, right? So if you are trying to make it straight, you know what you do, right? You bend it more the other direction. Then you bend it straight, and it stays straight. Y'all have all done this before with different things. That's kind of how this works with things like this. And it's also the case in our spiritual lives sometimes. If my spiritual life is disordered, if I'm drawn to something too much, or if I'm drawn to too many things, if I'm drawn to those things, then sometimes I need to go the opposite direction. I'm disordered in one direction. Sometimes I have to go intentionally the opposite direction to work against my disorientation. This is the spiritual concept of attachment versus detachment. And every spiritual master, from the ancients to the medievals to modern, they all talk about this concept of attachment and detachment. We all have this innate desire for God. We all hunger after God. We all know that something is missing in our lives. Even the most staunch atheist on earth realizes this. Even if he doesn't know that he realizes it, he knows that there's something missing in his life. We all have that void deep down inside. But oftentimes what we do with that desire is that we hook it onto something in this world. We hook it onto riches. We hook it onto status. We hook it onto power. We hook it onto that thing, that worldly good, because we want it to make us happy. We want it to fill that void. And when it doesn't at first, we pour more and more and more into it. And we keep going, and that's how we get addicted to things. We become attached to them because that void that's inside of us is designed to be filled by something that's infinite, to be filled by God. So nothing that's finite can fill that up. So the more we go after those things, the more we hook on to the things of this world, the more empty we're going to feel. So the concept of attachment versus detachment is that in order to pursue what truly fulfills, in order to pursue God, in order to attach onto Him, we have to become detached from things in this world that we're a little too close to. Ignatius of Loyola was a Catholic priest who lived in Spain about 500 years ago. When he was a young man who had just given his life to Jesus, he spent 9 months living in a cave in just complete simplicity. He lived in this cave. Before giving his life to Jesus, he had been obsessed with his appearance. He wanted everyone to notice how attractive he was. And so, in this cave, he let himself go. He let his hair grow out. He let his nails grow out for 9 months. He went the opposite direction. And it's the same with lust. He had been consumed by it, so he intentionally avoided anything that could cause him to go toward those thoughts. And he had been so obsessed with his reputation that he decided to live as a nobody. But really, he was even more than a nobody. Because if anyone saw him, their immediate reaction would be, who's that weirdo, right? With the hair all the way down here, the nails out. Even worse than a nobody. Someone who they assume is a threat. So for those 9 months, he lived in poverty. He lived in simplicity. He lived in fasting. He was detached from the world. He had been attached to many of the goods of the world, wealth and power, prestige and attractiveness. But if he was to do the will of God, he knew that he had to be detached from those things. So for those 9 months, in a particularly intense way, he engaged in this spiritual exercise of detachment. So this is when we take that cord and we go in the complete opposite direction. So if you are attracted to the sensual pleasures of the world, to things like drinking and eating, just drinking normal liquids, eating normal foods, if you're too stuck on that, then maybe you need to go the opposite direction. Maybe you need to actively go the other way, to fast. Maybe I'm too caught up in nice things. Maybe I'm too caught up in the comforts of this world, and I'm spending so many of my waking hours trying to make myself comfortable in life. Maybe I need to go the opposite direction. Maybe like Ignatius, maybe not quite exactly like him, but in the same vein, I need to embrace an uncomfortable life because I'm attached to this comfortable life. I'm trying to use that to fill that void when it can't. So I detach, and I attach onto God. Maybe I'm attached to money. Most of the people in our culture are. I go after that new house, that new job, that new car, those new clothes, a new circle of friends. And I get all of these things, and they never fill me because they can't. So maybe what I need to do is detach from them, to give a lot of money away, and in doing so, to be fulfilled. And maybe like Ignatius, I'm preoccupied with the honor that can come from people. I want glory. I want success. I want first place. I want the headline. So maybe I need to detach, to actively seek obscurity, actively seeking not to be noticed, actively seeking the lowest place. That principle is what we find here in Luke chapter 14. And we'll be in verses 7 through 11 tonight. Read the beginning of verse 7 with me. This principle of attachment and detachment, keep that in mind. Now he told a parable to those who were invited. Remember that he's at this feast, and now he's turning from the Pharisees, who had been the subject of the first few verses here. And he's turning to these regular people. And he tells them a parable. Now, that word parable is a signal to us, or at least it should be. It should tell us that there's something deeper going on here than just what meets the surface. Because a parable is a heavenly story or an earthly story with a heavenly meaning, right? So there's something at play here. There's a banquet that's going on in this story. But there's something deeper beneath the surface. Sure, Jesus is talking about a banquet, but he's not really talking about a banquet. He's saying that where we sit at that banquet reveals something about our hearts. So he tells this parable to these people when he noticed how they chose the places of honor. So in Jesus' day, like today, there were status symbols that showed to everyone else how important you were. If you were invited to the right homes, you were important. If you were seated in the right place in those homes, you were even more important. And these places of honor in this verse, these are the seats that would have been closest to the ruler of the Pharisees, the one who's throwing this feast. He's the important one here. So the closer you are to him, the more important you're saying to everyone else. So when they took these places of honor, when these people walked into this gathering and intentionally sat up front, they're saying to everybody else, hey, look at how important I am. I'm up here, and you're over there. So necessarily, you're less important than I am. And we know how this works, right? We're fellow sinners. We know how this works, like we talked about this morning. Which one are you going to choose? I mean, if it's me, I'm naturally choosing the place of honor over a place of dishonor. I don't want to be embarrassed. I want to feel good about myself. So I'm sitting over here. And this is even more important and pertinent in their culture, because their culture was governed by an honor and shame dynamic. If you think about a country like Japan in our modern times, they still have this type of dynamic where honor and shame are really what govern their lives. So you don't dishonor someone in Japan. That's a very, very awful thing to do. And it's kind of like that here in their culture, where they were governed by this honor and shame dynamic. So when they chose the places of honor, this is even more important to them. They got caught up in that dynamic, these people did. Their lives became about reputation rather than about character. Their lives were about what everybody else thought of them. To them, it was more important to sit in the right kinds of places and to be the right kinds of people. Now, what does Jesus think about that? Well, he tells this parable, beginning of verse 8. When you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him, and he who invited you both will come and say to you, give your place to this person. And then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. Not just a lower place, but the lowest place. You're going down to the bottom. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. What's he talking about? Detachment. Long before Ignatius of Loyola ever went into a cave, right? He's using the same principle. He's saying if you want that, actively work against it. Actively go the opposite direction. Take the lowest place. So if you want honor, seek humility. If you want fame, seek obscurity. If you want followers, seek being a follower. Go the opposite direction. Now, honestly, how often, when you go into a room like that, you know the kind of room that I'm talking about, the kind of room where you walk in and you feel the pressure to be ranked. You feel the pressure of status on you. You walk in and you feel the need to be number one. How often when you walk into a room like that, have you thought, you know what? I'm intentionally going to take the lowest place. I'm intentionally going to sit at table 135 instead of table 1. Because that's what he's calling for here. Detachment from these worldly obsessions. Think of how much energy we spend in our lives jockeying for position. What if we just said, I'm going to opt out. I'm not playing this game anymore. What would happen if we do that? I think what you'll find if you do try that is true freedom. True freedom from these attachments to the world. Because what happens when we get the monkey of attachment off of our backs, where I need to be number one, I need the wealth, I need the power, I need the fame, is that I find that I really don't need that. In fact, I need the opposite of that. I need the infinite instead of the finite. This is a spiritual problem, and it's an addiction like any other. Alcohol, drugs, pornography, money, fame, the different addictions in our world, whatever your addiction is, you know how it works. You get it, and then it wears off, and you need more of it, right? And then you get it again, finally, but it wears off even faster this time. And you need it again. And so you go after it, and eventually, hopefully you realize it's never going to satisfy you. It can never fill that void. This addiction is one just like any other. The addiction of wanting honor, wanting the place of popularity. And what that does when my entire life is preoccupied with absorbing these worldly goods is that it blocks my access to the will of God for my life. I can't discern what He wants for my life because I'm too focused on what I want with my life. In verse 11, Jesus caps off this section with an incredibly powerful phrase. It's the most famous one in this section. He says that everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Now, there's something strange that's going on here, because when you read verses 7 through 11, it seems like Jesus is almost agreeing with their motive. Do you see that? Is he really saying that you should be going for the highest place here at the banquet? Because that seems to be contrary to everything else that he teaches us, right? So what's going on here? Because this kind of seems like what you read in an entrepreneurial book or a book about networking, where you manipulate other people to get what you want in the end. That's kind of what this seems like. Take the lowest place, and so this guy will come up to you at the banquet, and he'll give you the highest place. It's kind of what it seems like. But I think that's actually the opposite of what Jesus is saying here. He's doing his thing, where he takes a spiritual or a physical reality, a physical desire, a physical problem, and he gives it spiritual fulfillment. So he's not saying that you'll be exalted in a physical sense. He's using it in a spiritual sense. He's saying, if you put yourself down low physically in this physical world, God will exalt you spiritually, in the spiritual realm, which matters the most. So this is not human exaltation that Jesus has in mind. He's not giving a strategy for getting a raise at your place of work or getting promoted. That's not the strategy that he's giving. He's giving you a strategy for what really matters, for exaltation in the eyes of God. Because the false humility that takes the lowest place to get the highest place is just as disgusting to God as the pride that takes the highest place to begin with, and maybe even more so, because you're trying to use other people for your own advantage. So Jesus told this story to make a bigger point. All of this worldly exaltation stuff, the entire hamster wheel of looking for fame and popularity and glory and fulfillment in other people, all of that stuff, it's all empty. It's pointless. Because if where you sit makes you important, you're not really important. If you come into a banquet and you sit at a place because it makes you feel important, I hate to break it to you, but you're really not. Because it's empty. It's pointless. Might feel good in the moment, but it doesn't last. Jesus is saying that place is not what matters. It's about who you are on the inside, about the person you really are. And it's about living your life and really giving your life for the sake of the people around you. And if I do that, if I forget myself and I live a radical life of selflessness, we'll get what we really wanted all along. I think really that's one of the things that surprised me about this text. It might be surprising to us in our lives if we implement it. Because if we really do get off of that hamster wheel, we're most likely to get what we wanted all along. I was thinking about how to illustrate this and give an analogy to it from our lives. The best I could come up with is something that might be weird, and it might be closer to people in my age of life, but you also probably can relate to it to some extent, even if you're not. So, if you're a guy who's going after a girl, all right? Said it might be weird. So you're a guy who's going after a girl. You know what you don't want to do? Maybe the number one thing you don't want to do is look desperate. You don't want her to think that she is your entire world. At least in the beginning, right? Ladies, I might be giving terrible advice here, but let's go with it. You don't want her to think that you're desperate, because nobody is attracted to that. Nobody wants that in the beginning. Now, what you have to do in order to get the girl, if you're chasing after her, is genuinely to move on, at least in some cases. You have to become detached from that obsession. And that's what really, in the end, makes you most likely to win her heart, is if you move on and you have other important things going on in life, right? Now, I think that's kind of the same principle here, where it's not that being exalted to the highest place is a bad thing. If you're a Christian and you're in the highest place and you're really a true disciple, you're living for God, you can do more good in the highest place than you can in the lowest place. It's not a bad thing to be up there. It's a bad thing to want to be up there for the sake of yourself. So if I genuinely give up on that obsession, that desire to be in the highest place for myself, I'm actually most likely to get there in the end. In 1 Peter chapter 5, not only spiritually, but also physically, but most importantly, it's true spiritually, because I'm thinking about 1 Peter chapter 5, where Peter tells us to clothe ourselves with humility, to put it on like a garment. Like you get up in the morning, you put your clothes on for the day, same thing. Put your humility on for the day. Clothe yourselves with humility toward one another. That phrase, toward one another, tells us that the humility that we need to have has an immediate impact on our interactions with each other. So clothe yourselves with humility toward one another. Why? Because God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And what do we want more than God's grace, right? So if I want God's grace, I've got to be humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time, He might exalt you. You see that? If you want to be exalted, if you want the highest place, You have to take the lowest place. That's how this works in the spiritual realm. It's by giving up my obsession with getting up there for me, going down low for the sake of everybody else, and at the proper time, God will exalt you, and He'll exalt me. That's what the people in this parable and at this banquet had missed. They'd missed that life isn't about them. And it's not about getting richer for themselves. It's not about getting more followers for themselves. It's not about being more comfortable. It's about the people around us. And if we live like that, we actually get what we always wanted in the end. Now, what about us? For us, it might not be sitting in the right places, but it is still about being close to the right people, right? That's why networking is a huge thing. And it really is still about being invited to the right parties, to the right gatherings, to the right meetings. It's still about that. It's still about wearing the right kinds of clothes and saying the right kinds of things and laughing at the right kinds of things and gathering up the things that I need for me. And that's really what it's still all about. Just like then and now, it's still all about me. That's what social media is all about for most people. It's about getting followers and friends and likes and shares just so I feel better about myself. Finding my validation in those metrics. And it becomes easy also to judge other people based on those metrics, to say, because of your high follower count or low follower count, I look up to you or I look down on you. It's really easy to do that, to judge other people based on what other people think of them, to judge other people based on what they look like on the outside, rather than actually getting to know them and caring about them for who they really are. And it's really easy to do that to myself, to take all of those external metrics of popularity and apply that to myself and find my self-worth or my lack of self-worth in those external metrics. We can start judging ourselves and our worth based on what everybody else thinks about us in the world. And we forget about the only one whose opinion really matters. The one who said that everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Jim Carrey hosted the 2016 Golden Globes, and he came out, his opening monologue was a parody of the Golden Globes. He was making fun of the Golden Globes. And I think it actually illustrates pretty well what we're talking about right now. So as he comes out on stage, he's announced as two-time Golden Globe winner, Jim Carrey. So as he begins his speech, I want to read the beginning of the speech to you. He says, "Thank you. I am two-time Golden Globe winner, Jim Carrey. You know, when I go to sleep at night, I am not just a guy going to sleep. I'm two-time Golden Globe winner, Jim Carrey, going to get some well-needed shut-eye." Now, just to clarify, he's joking. He's not actually trying to pump himself up. "And when I dream, I don't just dream any old dream. No, sir. I dream about being three-time Golden Globe winning actor, Jim Carrey, because then I would be enough. It would finally be true. And I can stop this terrible search for what I know ultimately won't fulfill me. But these are important, these awards." And so he goes on to make fun of the awards because they can't give us what we really need. But I think he actually placed his finger on something that's really true. Jim Carrey, in a lot of ways, had reached one of the heights of our society. He was one of the most popular people in our country. But he realized that this hamster wheel that he was on, of getting yet another Golden Globe, wasn't going to fulfill him in the end. He realized there was something missing, and that all of that pomp and circumstance was empty. It was just a show for everybody else, but it didn't really mean anything to the people who were involved. Now, in our world, and in our pressure cooker of popularity and likes and followers, it's easy to forget about humility. It's easy to forget about taking the lowest place. It's easy to go my entire life trying to pump myself up, trying to make myself the most important and significant person in the room. It's easy to forget about humility. And as we talk about humility, I think we need to say that we shouldn't get humility confused with insecurity. Remember this morning that we talked about how you can be incredibly insecure and be incredibly prideful? Because in that insecurity, I'm focusing on me still. That's what pride is. It's just an obsession with myself It's just living life for myself. So I can be incredibly insecure and be incredibly prideful. So humility is not the same as insecurity. It's not the same as looking badly at myself or having a low self-worth. No, humility is just not thinking of myself at all. It's having an accurate self-image. In Romans 12 and verse 3, Paul tells us that none of us should think more highly of ourselves than we ought to think. We should just have an accurate self-image. I'm good at some things. I'm bad at other things. Same with you. Humility is not insecurity. It's not thinking less about myself or of myself. It is thinking less about myself. It's not saying that I'm the worst, most worthless human being on earth. Because that denies our Creator. Think about who put you here. Think about who created you. God. God put you here. That should give you incredible self-worth. You should never feel insecure. And if you do, we're not judging you here. That's why we're here together. But it's something you should be working toward. You should have incredible self-worth because God created you. And then He recreated you spiritually. If you're a Christian, if you're a disciple, Ephesians 2:10 tells us that we were created by Him for a purpose, to walk in the good works that He's given to us. So God created you for a purpose, and then He recreated you for a purpose. If anything should give you self-worth, it's that. So humility is not insecurity. It's not thinking less of myself. It's thinking less about myself. And that's what I should be going after. A life that says, I don't have to have that shotgun seat, right? I can just sit in the middle back. I sit in the worst spot because I want everybody else around me to have what they want. So if I want to be exalted one day, I need to forget about all of the popularity, all of the followers, all of the fame that so many in our culture are going after. Forget about myself and just try to be like Jesus. Because He came not to be served, but to serve. Even though it happened, He didn't come to get famous. He came to die in shame on a cross. Like Philippians 2 tells us, He emptied Himself and He came here. And He looked like us, of all things, us weird-looking beings, right? He came and He looked like us. And He didn't just come and look like us. He came as a servant, the lowest of us all. And then He died as the lowest of us all. But, like He says in Luke 14:11, whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Philippians 2, 9 through 11 tells us that God, because of His sacrifice, has exalted Himself above everybody else. And at His feet, one day, every knee will bow. And we will all confess that Jesus is Lord. Not to our own glory, but to the glory of God the Father. That's what it's all about. It's about humbling ourselves. So one day, in due time, at the proper time, as Peter says, God will exalt us. Now, if you have something that you need to make right tonight, why don't you do it as we stand and as we sing?